Can you beat OMORI with only OMORI? Wait, what? What do you mean there's already 2 people who did a video on that? Fine, I guess I'll just have to find some other thing to do. Yeah, sure, this works. In OMORI, items can be a very essential part of combat, often helping you in really tricky or just dumb situations. But in this video, we're gonna be playing the whole game without using the snacks or toys options, effectively eliminating nearly half of our utility. On top of that, I am also not allowed to use snacks to heal outside of battle, but I am so allowed to heal using skills both during and outside of combat. However, I easily saw this challenge being not that interesting with things like just using picnic baskets to refill whenever my health or juice count for anyone got low. So to make things more interesting, I set up a couple of specific rules for myself while playing through this challenge. The first of which, and arguably the most brutal, being that I am only allowed to use a refill on each picnic location once. To explain, let's say I enter Pirafly Forest and I come upon a picnic in that location. I can use that picnic to refill all my health and juice once, and after that I am not allowed to use that specific picnic's refill for the rest of the game. Finally, I specifically required myself to combat all enemies within an area. The only exception to this rule is if I want to do a puzzle or just enter another room to think of a strategy, but I have to fight every enemy that is in the room before moving on to fight enemies in another room. Oh, and also I'm merely going to be going over to the headspace sections of the game because, I mean, the real world fights are real-world fights, so we're gonna officially commence the end of the challenge after the last obligatory boss fight being Humphrey. However, as you'll see towards the end of the video, I decided to do Orange Oasis anyways, even though it's entirely optional. Alright, with all that set in stone, let's begin the challenge. The first headspace section doesn't alter, like, at all for this challenge. We hardly have any items to use anyways, so we can just skip that section, wake up as Snooty, conquer our fear of heights, and enter Otherworld. Wait a second, we can't do that just yet. Before we can enter Otherworld, we have to search the vast forest for Bagel, which, wouldn't you know, is sprinkled with forest bunnies and lost sprout moles. Thus, the challenge truly begins here. The early stages of this challenge are going to be particularly problematic for one real reason. Juice limitations. See, obviously our values for juice start out extremely low for this challenge, but that doesn't apply to most of our friends since we just use normal attacks and follow-ups to kill the overworld enemies. Notice how I said most, because this limitation is going to extremely affect one of our friends highly for this challenge, Hero. Right now, Hero can only heal our friend using the cook skill, which at this point we can only use a few times. Even worse is we have absolutely no way to actually recover our juice without using a refill right now. This means we have to use Hero's cook skill remarkably wisely in the vast forest fights. Thankfully, the enemies have plenty of idle or nothing moves, as I call them, where they just do nothing for their turn, and even when they do attack, they don't do all that much damage despite our low HP values. However, even as we get halfway through the vast forest, you can see we're already starting to get into lower health territory, which could mean that one of our friends can actually die, thus leading to the second early issue that will persist throughout the whole game, and that's getting toast. Since Life Gem is an item in the snack inventory, it's banned by default to be used, and so if a friend gets toasted, they're dead for the rest of the fight and will start at 1 HP at the next fight, unless they are healed by Hero in between battles. Going back to our current position now, the main downside to friends getting toast is them not getting EXP, which will be pretty important throughout this whole challenge. If anyone falls behind, then they will struggle against later enemies, thus they will not be able to gain EXP in most cases, as they'll probably just get killed by whatever said enemies end up being. As you can see, Hero keeps getting killed, thus preventing him from getting as much EXP as the others, but aside from a few casualties, we escaped the vast forest without much loss. Now we are ready to climb the ladder to Otherworld, and it was at this time that something suddenly occurred to me: the Earth boss fight. Now, I know it's optional, and I know it isn't a good idea to fight it this early on, but I'm a masochist, and I did say we had to fight every overworld enemy we came across. That includes the Earth. However, I got an idea that involved doing a little bit of grinding. When you enter Otherworld initially, you can either go up to where most of the stuff is, or you can go left, to Cattail Fields, which is where we'll be going next. This area is filled with UFOs who have minuscule health, 20 to be exact, but they often come in large groups. This makes them dangerous if they aren't dealt with quickly. However, I had a strategy to kill these things and grind extra EXP to prepare for the Earth. First, I had to get Kale to level 5, which we were able to pretty quickly upon entering Cattail Fields. After that, the grinding commenced. We have Kale attack, and at level 5 and above, Kale will go before any of the UFOs. Granted, they aren't happy, which isn't a concern to me. Then we have Kale follow up with Hero, which allows them to damage all enemies, and this will normally kill all the UFOs on screen, leading to an easy win. After clearing Cattail Fields, everyone is now at around level 6, and at this point, we have to face the Earth, abiding to my rules. The Earth was the first fight that I truly struggled with. I only died once, albeit in a stupid way, but it was still kind of stressful, especially since on my first attempt doing this challenge, it took me about half a dozen attempts. The real scary feat of the Earth was its ultimate attack, which it performs once at ludicrously low health. It's actually possible to bypass this, but it usually won't happen at this kind of level, so you just gotta tank it normally. The top priority in this fight isn't actually to keep everyone alive, but rather to keep OMORI from reaching a succumb state before the Earth uses its ultimate attack. If OMORI does reach a succumb state before this, then we've already lost, as when the Earth uses its ultimate attack, it'll kill OMORI, and of course, that's an instant game over. Now, I could always heal with Hero, and I did have enough juice to heal one more time with Hero. However, none of that really did matter, because ultimately, making OMORI furious and making the Earth sad ended up saving me. I did die once, but not because the Earth killed me or anything, but because on my first attempt, I survived the ultimate attack and panicked and accidentally passed the ball from Kel to OMORI, and he was on 1 health. The result? Kel killed OMORI and ended that run. I was a bit salty about it at first, but looking back at it, it's fucking hilarious. The Earth fight did leave my health pretty low, so the first few fights in the Junkyard were pretty nerve-wracking. Thankfully, once I got past those, I did manage to refill my health using the Life Jam guy in this bin. I know it's not a picnic basket or anything, but not only did I need a refill, but it wasn't like I used it before or anything, nor could I use it again, so I decided that it was okay for the run. The rest of the Junkyard was pretty mellow, and we actually managed to save a picnic refill in the Junkyard, which you'll see later was a tremendously smart decision on my part. After all the Junkyard fights, we chase after Rosa and face the download window. This fight is nothing special, just except that it did take away over half of everyone's HP, but I did anticipate that. We went without much trouble, grabbed a special mixtape from Rosa, and wake Space ex-boyfriend up from his nap, commencing his boss fight. Something I didn't do was use Hero's Cut to restock everyone's HP from the previous boss fight, and thus we end up with low health overall at the beginning of this fight. Thankfully, I actually got pretty lucky initially with Space ex-boyfriend's attacks here and managed to heal everyone effectively. Also to note is that we unlocked a very important skill for OMORI, which is Moth. This is huge against Space ex-boyfriend, as it'll lower his attack significantly when he's angry, but this doesn't mean he's suddenly a walk in the park either. As a matter of fact, we still need to be super careful around him, especially since we only had 2 hero heals left. Things only got worse once he became furious, as he quickly killed both Aubrey and our healer, Hero, meaning both of them wouldn't be granted the hefty amount of EXP that was awarded for this fight. Nonetheless, we still won, but with only Kel and OMORI standing. After this fight, we retreated from Otherworld, and I made the great decision of fighting the Kite Kid at the point that I was at. Keep in mind, I needed to go to Pirafly Forest regardless because of a hangman key, and I was in the area, so I had to abide to my rules. Thank God there was a picnic in the area, otherwise I would have just come back to fight the booger later. Despite getting a refill for him, the Kite Kid was single-handedly the most irritating thing in this challenge yet, even though he's completely optional. Even with the motion debuffs, both him and his kite just deal so much damage to us, and it becomes nigh impossible for Hero to keep up with healing. The worst move is by far the kite diving down, as it deals obnoxious amounts of damage to everyone, and it arguably led to the most amount of kills in this fight single-handedly. It took me, I think, around half a dozen attempts to kill this kid, and I did win, but not without losing all my friends, but also just barely winning after OMORI went into a succumb state after the others already died. Not to mention the kid and his kite were mauling OMORI in the process. Had he already gone into that state, they would have been beating a dead horse with an airplane. Considering I had gotten my ass whooped by some kid's kite, I realized I was probably a little too under level to enter Pirafly Forest in the next section, especially with a certain enemy that was to meet me there. So after overcoming the fear of spiders, I ventured back into Otherworld on my next headspace section and grinded that area quite a bit, specifically the Junkyard, as it had the most reasonable amount of XP heavy enemies so far. I did this until everyone was around level 13. I now considered myself ready to tackle Pirafly Forest. Hero is arguably one of my most important assets in this challenge by far, which is why this area suddenly exploits one of the biggest weaknesses of the challenge, Hero not being able to heal. As I'm sure you all know, Hero, whenever combating certain enemies in Pirafly Forest, becomes afraid, meaning he cannot use skills or his own follow-up moves, effectively disassembling any healing in combat. This actually turned out to not be too bad in this session, especially with how forgiving the bug bunnies were being to me, which was surreal. However, I still had a decent chunk of my HP bin out of me, but thankfully Marie set up a picnic in the scary woods, and when I was done fighting all the regular enemies here, I used that picnic's refill and faced the rare bear. Simply put, we divert the rare bear's emotions from angry as much as possible, as it only attacks us when it's at that emotion specifically. It sounds easy as mess on paper, but the rare bear's speed when it's angry outmaneuvers everyone else, meaning we will still have to deal with its disgusting attacks, just less frequently as before. Oh, and Mock was a very necessary move to lower its attack as much as possible. Even with the attack debuffs, it packed quite a punch, so I still had to be careful. Thankfully, Wits and Smarts went out the end, and I defeated the bear without any casualties. Yay. Afterwards, we ride the minecart through the forest, refill with the next available picnic, and face King Crawler. This boss fight is normally pretty underwhelming actually, and it definitely wasn't too bad this challenge. The biggest thing is preventing it from eating the sprout moles that appear, which make King Crawler heal and make it happy. However, I was able to do just that, and I even got enough energy for an ultimate attack on my end, which finished off King Crawler and moved us forward to Sprout Mole Village. After some wacky shenanigans, we're put into the Slammer, breakout, and then begin to fight the dungeon's guards. These guys are very limiting threats in single numbers, and I'm able to kill them all with minimal health loss. So I maneuver out of the dungeon and end up in the bulk of the forest, Sweetheart's Castle. I instantly take care of the enemies in the perimeter, which definitely does drain my health, especially since the ones inside the castle almost always appear in groups of 2 or more. The groups of these guys in 3 are the ones I particularly had to look out for, as if I was careless, things could get out of hand fast. I definitely saw myself using Hero's follow-ups to heal my other friends, rather than his skills outright. Speaking of Hero, I actually learned a very important skill for him in the castle called Homemade Jam. So long as Hero wasn't the one who got toasted, he could now bring Aubrey or Kel back to life. Granted, it costs 40 juice, but that's still great for this challenge. Anyways, with all that in mind, let's talk about our favorite trio punching bags. The Sir Maximus fights were pitiful as it turned out. The only attacks that did any real damage to me were their ultimate attacks, but even then they weren't all that bad. It certainly helped that I fought every enemy in the castle, as that boosted my level to around level 20 by the time I was done with Sir Maximus 3. After helping out with stuff around the castle and literally murdering an entire family bloodline, we make it out of the castle and kill even more enemies. We make it below the garden, ensue more wacky shenanigans, and now it's finally time for the Sweetheart boss fight. I'm gonna be real with you guys, this fight was annoying. Not because I kept dying or anything, but the general setup of this fight just made me angry, like how all the friends kept getting angry. As I'm sure you may know, Sweetheart has a special attack in her fight where she turns everyone angry in one turn. Even worse is the fact that she reaches happy emotions that we can't reverse. This means that she will constantly be making us angry, which constantly puts us at an emotion disadvantage. Charming. Simply not having items like the Rain Cloud for this fight makes it more obnoxious than I thought was intended, despite Sweetheart being a literal devil. My initial plan was to make her angry before her permanent happy change went out, so I could utilize OMORI's Mock to make her attack weaker period. And it worked, but only for a little bit. Once Sweetheart became happy, things went south fast. Despite all our attacks usually being dull attacks, we actually still did a decent bit of damage to Sweetheart herself, since Angry has higher damage rates, but because of its lower defense, we were in even more critical danger of getting killed at any moment. almost every turn, OMORI had to use Sad Poem either on himself or Aubrey, just so the two could have a chance of not getting squashed by Sweetheart. Also, last time I checked, I thought being happy, let alone being ecstatic and manic, upped your chances of missing, but Sweetheart didn't seem to miss any of her attacks against me, and if she did, it was usually on the people who I could have allowed her to get away with hitting. My first attempt at this fight seemed like I was gonna win with everyone intact, despite my hardships, and it seemed like that. I was this close to killing her, but then she just decided to murder OMORI, and it led to a game over on this spot. Seriously, I understand why it's a thing in the game, but having OMORI be the sole reason for your run's end was really stupid for this challenge specifically. Anyways, I tried again, still with many hardships with Sweetheart and her stupid attacks. Her mace attack was also pretty brutal, especially if anyone was enraged. You're also probably wondering about Hero's homemade jam skill, by the way. It's definitely useful for if anyone gets killed in practice, but Hero will probably have to use all his juice on fast food, which is a weaker cook that acts first. This is actually even better, because I often found Hero getting pumped before he could even use cook on anyone, so a healing skill that acts above anything else, but even if it heals less HP overall, is even better depending on the circumstances. Anyways, this boss fight is not a particularly fun one for this challenge, and I think I certainly got lucky to even beat it on my second attempt. It ended with both Hero and Kel dead, only delaying Hero's progress on the leveling chart even more, but we did beat the sassy brat in only 2 tries. Honestly, could have been way worse for me, so I shouldn't complain too much. After that, another concern came to me as I went to the last headspace section directly after the events of 2 days left. The last resort may actually be a problem. Firstly, we only have OMORI and Kel on hand for a total of 6 Gator Guy fights, and no ways to heal besides refills, which, spoilers, we only had 2 for the last resort. However, I underestimated how powerful my guys actually were. Even with Kel not getting the EXP boost from Sweetheart's fight, they managed the Gator Guys in the last resort pretty well, and we get Aubrey back to confront Mr. Jossum in his office. Thankfully, the bosses at this point cannot affect our emotions in the way that Sweetheart could, meaning a happy against angry strategy was now the most optimal course of action for the remaining fights to come. It then came to me that the amount of battling that I did in Sweetheart's castle really paid off, because to tell you guys how well I was doing leveling wise, I killed Mr. Jossum in 3 turns flat. He couldn't do a thing against me. Then we get to Pluto Expanded, who honestly wasn't even that bad as well. He did kill Kel once with a submission hold, but we just bring him back to life with homemade jam. One of the other amazing things about this last headspace segment is how good Hero's follow-up moves really are. They heal so much health that we hardly even need to use his skills to heal at all. Plus, that means that he has more than enough juice to use homemade jam if need be. We defeat Pluto Expanded with everyone alive, and it's finally time to go through the underwater highway. Now, you can do 2 things here. Either pay the tolls up front or bypass them using an alternate route filled with enemies. For the sake of the challenge, can you guess which route I ended up going? I did have more than enough clamps to pay the gators. I mean, I wasn't using those clamps for anything at all in the game, but I just simply thought going the enemy route would help extremely with grinding, and to go against the final 2 bosses in this challenge. I managed to do very well against the armada of enemies that were in this highway. Even though I did struggle to get my friends freshly healed at first, it didn't take too long for their strengths to catch up to the constant enemies we kept going against. The biggest threats were probably the shark fins, since they do a lot of damage, but even so, Hero's healing was subpar at this point, so they weren't even that big of a threat. Finally, we have the snaily fights. The only one worth discussing is the last one, where he managed to actually kill Hero, but I instantly slaughtered him on the spot regardless. Plus, only dropped a coffee, so Hero wasn't missing much. After we get through the end of the underwater highway is when we traverse through Deeper Well and enter Humphrey, kickstarting the last mandatory area of the game. Molly's area was straightforward, and I even took time to grind just a hair in the wires puzzle room with the worm bot, since I was killing them before they could even attack me anyways. Marina's room was fun, but not too much to discuss. However, Medusa's section was where the problems began. See, I totally forgot about the snot bubble's existence in this game, and their specific tech of exploding when defeated and dealing obnoxious levels of damage to everyone, and there are a lot of them in Medusa's room. Hiro's healing was now even more needed than it ever was, constantly having to use his cook skill specifically, since he wouldn't normally have a chance to attack normally before the snot bubbles burst, so the broken follow-up skills he possessed were no longer working as well as they would have. Even worse is when we get into battles with more than one snot bubble. These will often end with our friend's health below than half their max amount of HP. It was mostly being very careful with my healing with Hiro, and by the time I got to the last few fights, their health was scarily low. We got many deaths in a few very close calls. The very last snot bubble encounter ended with everyone dead and OMORI at 1 HP. Those fights single-handedly gave me the most anxiety in this challenge. After completing Medusa's area, we're finally up against the final two obligatory bosses in this challenge, the Slam Girls and Humphrey. Despite how anxious I was with the snot bubbles, they did provide a very positive upside to their encounters. I was now at around level 39 with everyone on board, which proved to be more than enough to take care of the Slam Girls. Their attacks were pretty underwhelming, and a simple happy against angry strategy proved to be more than enough to challenge them. They do have an ability to change everyone's emotions randomly, but they can't change their own emotions at all, so it's not even that big of a deal. The main concern to us is when they switch our HP and juice around. I specifically ensure I didn't use too much juice beforehand so that my HP wasn't suddenly paper thin, and it worked out marvelously. Even with Aubrey, who has an inherently low juice count by default, I actually healed her in the same turn with Hiro's cut skill, which was a gamble admittedly, but it worked out in the end. When the Slime Girls did use their ultimate attack, it did lead to Hiro ending up dead, but at this point I was no longer concerned about Hiro falling behind. Everyone was simply too powerful. So I defeated the Slime Girls, and afterwards comes the very last fight for this challenge. Humphrey, and he's definitely not going down without a fight. To my knowledge, most people seem to struggle with Humphrey's first stage, which makes sense considering that he does do a decent amount of damage. However, his multi-hit attacks have an unintentional benefit towards us. We can use the juice gathered by those attacks to make Hiro heal to others with his follow-ups, and the first phase becomes a lot less problematic as a result. Still using the happy against angry strat, we get past the first stage and swiftly bypass the second stage. It's at the third stage that things become a bit less of a cakewalk. Humphrey will continuously damage everyone every turn by swallowing us, and it makes healing with Hiro a little more hectic. However, Humphrey damaging everyone every turn means we can actually spam our ultimate attack against him, which sadly didn't work out as smoothly as I was wanting. Despite that, I got a good few attacks in using those, and the primary reason why this stage in specific was as problematic as it was because I forgot to make Humphrey angry again, making his hits against me do more damage than it would have if he was angry. Even though I had to play a bit more smart with healing towards the end, we managed to successfully defeat Humphrey with everyone standing. We defeat the core of Humphrey, his mouth thing, he spits us out, and we make it out of Humphrey's body, thus signifying the end of the challenge. Well, sort of. As I said before, I did decide to go through Orange Oasis despite it being entirely optional, so the challenge did truly end there, but I wanted to venture to Orange Oasis regardless. The result, it was pretty easy. None of the enemies gave me a particularly hard time, and I even did very well against the Unbred Twins, who are a late game boss in the same vein as Pluto Expanded and the Slime Girls, and we still leveled up even more with our ending levels being around level 39 to 41, and thus the challenge is now truly over. We venture into Black Space, betray Basil against our better judgment, explore through the shenanigans, and one day left, relearn the truth, finally fight the root of Sunny's ignorance, OMORI, and finally unleash the truth upon everyone else. Well, that was OMORI without items, and also under a few other specific circumstances. Thanks to everyone who watched this far. I hope you all enjoyed this video. It was a pretty fun challenge for the most part. I just got pretty salty at the Kite and Sweetheart. Mostly, those guys suck. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that other fancy stuff, and yeah, I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.